Welcome back to Real News. I'm David Knight. Do you think of electric power as a matter of life and death? People in the aftermath of these natural disasters in Puerto Rico and in Florida, the hurricanes, are thinking of it as a matter of life and death. And as a matter of fact, we've had just a couple of days ago, the 11th person in a Florida nursing home die because they lost power and they died from the heat. That's a 94-year-old individual, Alice Thomas, died 3 days ago. So it's now at 11 people. And there is a bit of a political back and forth going on with the governor there. The people who run the rehabilitation center, the nursing home, they've had their license pulled, but they say, we sent messages to the governor's office. We left distress calls on his private cell phone. And so back and forth, it was in the mail. And the question is, were these emails ignored? Were they being deleted? And here's the bottom line. Craig Richardson, who is joining us now, is with an organization called E&E Legal, Environment and Energy Legal. They put together a great video that I'm going to play for you here in a second, and then we're going to talk to Craig about it. But we've got a situation that is happening across the world, especially in some of the European countries. We're seeing this first. You've got people who are in desperate straits that need affordable energy. And their government in Germany and elsewhere is essentially ignoring the message. They're essentially putting it on hold. What they're accusing the Florida governor's office, they're saying, hey, we sent these messages, we sent emails, or we sent phone messages, you guys didn't pay any attention to them, or you deleted them, or whatever. Well, that's happening, but it's being done very deliberately by the people in the European Union, by the people who are pushing the Paris Climate Agreement. And that's an important thing to understand. I want to play this video for you that was put together by E&E Legal. It hits right at the heart of this Paris Climate Agreement. And understand, this thing is not dead. We've got people in the administration who've been fighting President Trump on this from day one, continue to fight him on it. We've got Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State. We have Gary Cohen fighting him on it, as well as contacting individuals in the UN, contacting individuals in the French government elsewhere, saying, hey, I think we can still pull this back in. I think maybe we can keep this from getting out. Just give us a couple of concessions, and we'll stay in there on the important issues. But here's what President Trump had to say. This is the video that's put together by E&E Legal. It's a great video.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
On June 1st, President Trump promised to withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Global Warming Treaty. But news reports now say staff are looking for ways to go back on that promise. The president is right. The deal is bad for Americans. These failed policies are already harming, even killing the poor and most vulnerable in Europe, and would do the same thing here. In Europe, energy poverty is killing seniors and the poor by tens of thousands. Climate policies that no one actually claims will have any impact on the climate. In Germany, electricity has become a luxury good. 800,000 homes are unable to pay their electric bills. It's called the second rent. In England, electric bills are expected to exceed mortgage payments soon. In Ireland, a third of seniors are now forced to choose between heating and eating. Bookstore owners report seniors are now buying books to burn to keep warm. Still, additional winter deaths are spiking as policymakers add more and more global warming regulations. In England and Wales alone, nearly 15,000 people died in one winter, unable to adequately heat their homes. An unjust disgrace that is the direct result of government policies. Those numbers will be much higher in the U.S. if the president changes his mind on withdrawing from the Paris Treaty. Already, lawyers are asking the courts to enforce it against us. No climate impact, terrible costs, particularly for our seniors and struggling families. With U.S. electricity rates already skyrocketing, ask yourself, what is the right number of the most vulnerable to kill for no impact on our climate? Tell President Trump to ignore the swamp and keep his promise. There are no acceptable terms for a treaty that promises policies that kill the most vulnerable.
All right, that's a great commercial, and it gets right to the point. That was produced by eelegal.org, and we're talking to the president of that organization, Craig Richardson. Craig, that really hits the nail on the head. We've seen exactly what you're talking about here in this illustration in Florida with a nursing home, but in that commercial you point out that in Germany it's a luxury good. In UK, they're paying more for electric power than they are for mortgages in many cases. In Ireland, they're having to decide whether they're going to heat or whether they're going to be able to eat. So when you make power artificially expensive, it has real human cost, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I don't think there's any good out there that you can use to effectively get poor out of poverty than energy, as you said up front. And the opposite is true as well. There's no easier way to drive people and keep them in poverty if you have unrealistic and exploding electricity rates like we have going on to some extent in this country. And you only need to look at states like California, which have these European-style climate change policies in place. And you know, it's interesting, but President Obama used to say prior to things really going south there, he'd say, well, we need to look to Europe as an example for how we can do climate change policies in the United States. And the funny thing is, after energy poverty became a widespread crisis, you never heard him say it anymore. And we used to say, yeah, look to Europe. You want to look how these things are going to work? Look to Europe.
And of course, the issue there, because they have a cooler climate, the issue there is people dying from the cold, the elderly dying from the cold, the pensioners who are dying from the cold, versus in America where they died from the power being cut off because of the heat. But as we look at the Paris Climate Accord, that was one of the key things that President Trump had campaigned on. He immediately got rid of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that trade agreement that was going to control our economy. But the climate accord was something that was going to control our economy, that even the people who believed in man-made global warming said this really isn't going to address the problem. Tell people why that wouldn't address the problem.
Well, I think it was in a 100-year period, it was going to reduce temperature by their modeling. Let's go back to their modeling, which is yet to be correct on anything. But even by their own modeling, it was like 0.2 degrees over 100 years. So then it begged the issue, as we say in this video, I mean, what is the right number of people to die for a meaningless gesture? You know, why are we going to give China full reign to have whatever power sources they want and compete with us on a manufacturing basis, and yet straddle us with these unworkable renewable energy standards that don't work? I mean, what? And that really gets to the heart of this, and that is, what is the goal of these people? What are they trying to do? Because clearly it's not to try to reduce global temperatures, because 0.2 degrees over 100 years is not going to get us there.
Yeah, and when they put in exemptions for developing countries like China and India, who are building more, you probably got the statistics on it, but I think it's more coal factories each year than we have built over a decade. Then, you know, they're rapidly advancing this. But of course, there weren't going to be any caps put on them for another 10 years or so, and then not any declines for a period of time after that. And so if it's a global issue, then you would think that it would be a global solution. But we can see how some areas are punished and others are rewarded in that. That's why this is merely an instrument of political control. It's an instrument of redistribution of wealth, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the original IPCC chair, the woman that's the climate change policy group of the UN, said that. She said the climate change is a means to, or at that time was global warming because it was the early 90s. But she said climate change isn't an end in itself. It's a means to an end of redistribution of wealth. She said that. So, and the other piece of this, and you mentioned the trade agreement, you have to understand that we've already, thanks to the elitists who played the game of risk about 30 or 40 years ago, decided that China was going to be the manufacturing base. They've already moved most of our jobs over there. So part of this is to help China.
Yeah, part of this is to make sure that that's going to be what really happens. We're talking to Craig Richardson. He's president of E&E Legal. And when we come back, we're going to talk to him about the importance of staying out of the Paris Climate Agreement, even though we have individuals who unfortunately are in the Trump administration still pushing him to stay in, because we're not officially out of it, I guess, yet. So they're saying we can still salvage this thing. Let's hope they can't. I'm David Knight. This is Real News. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Real News. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Craig Richardson, president of E&E Legal. We played in the last segment a commercial that they did illustrating the fact that there is a real cost to this artificially inflated energy policies that we are getting in the European Union. They've been the ones leading the way into so-called sustainable energy, and yet it is not sustainable. It has economic and life costs that they point out in that video. People in the UK are now spending more on, many cases, the retirees are spending more on their energy costs than they are on their mortgage. In Ireland, the retirees are having to decide whether or not they're going to eat or whether they're going to be able to heat their home. It's absolutely amazing that you would turn basic power into a luxury good. And although the issue there is heating, we've seen the consequences of it here in Florida, as we saw in the aftermath of the hurricane. 11 people died because they didn't have electricity to keep elderly people cool. So it's a different issue there. But they are artificially and politically cutting off the power to these people in Europe. So we're going to get back to that real quickly. I just want to remind you before we get back to Craig that we have some big sales at InfoWarsStore.com. 40% off Secret 12. That's our vitamin B12 organic formula that you can take your B12 supplements without an injection. We also have all Emmerich's Essential Packs. That's our household organic goods, 50% off. Caveman True Paleo Formula, 50% off. And we have 20% off InfoWars Patriot Blend or Immune Support Blend coffee at checkout when you enter the code WAKEUP. Again, that's 20% off InfoWars Patriot Blend or Immune Support Blend coffee at checkout when you enter the code WAKEUP. If you try that coffee, I guarantee you're going to love it. That's what really keeps us going here in the morning with the morning crew. Now, Craig, you know, when you're talking about this, and we've had President Trump do the right thing. He got us out of the Paris Climate Accord. Of course, you point out, rightfully so, that we never were really legally in it. We had President Obama say, well, you know, the Constitution says we have this process, but the Senate won't ratify it, so I'll ratify it myself. So we were never truly in it. But now we've got these people like Rex Tillerson and Gary Cohen pushing to try to make sure that we, quote unquote, stay in it. Tell us about how that is looking now.
Yeah, the June the June 1st announcement really was just his intention that we would be withdrawing, but because of the UN clause in this contract, which this agreement or treaty, which really is a treaty, they say that, I mean, technically we can't actually get out of it and from underneath it until November 4th, 2020. I mean, so that's a long way. There are other triggers and process. We got to get a letter to them in the next year or so. But each one of these bites at the apple gives the internal struggle, and you saw that leading up to June 1st, and they are very real. You mentioned the Secretary of State and his own daughter and son-in-law, and now you don't have Steve Bannon there anymore. So every time these deadlines come up, and as things get, you know, the UN meeting a couple weeks ago when he gave his first address, I guess it was a week ago, every time the world leaders get together, it gives them another opportunity to try to chip away at, yeah, well, you know, he didn't really mean it, or let's you know, stay in, but we'll give you, like you said up front, what are the negotiation tools that we can give the U.S. so they'll stay in? You know, a bad deal is a bad deal. I don't know how else to describe it.
Well, you know, what we were told is that it took so long for President Trump because he was having opposition from Rex Tillerson, from the Goldman Sachs bankers and others who are going to profit from this. And as they were looking at Rex Tillerson when he was being considered for Secretary of State, I said, this guy is a globalist in terms of the climate change stuff. And everybody's, oh, he's working for an oil company. Don't. And it's like, no, these guys are the ones who are pushing it more than anybody because they want to be the De Beers, to oil, what De Beers is to diamonds. But what they were telling the president, from what I heard, was don't worry about it. It's not really anything that you've got to get out of. We're not officially in it. But now they're saying that even though it wasn't ratified as a treaty, that we're not going to be able to get out of it for several more years? Is that the line that they're telling them now? Yeah,
well, it's in the clause of this thing, again, that you said that it really should have gone to the Senate. And so there's a lot of legal issues as to whether or not we don't believe it was ever, you know, signed and it has teeth on us because the process wasn't done right. But certainly there are a lot of lawyers, and we're already seeing lawsuits popping up about his getting out in the first place. So, you know, there's a lot of legal wrangling going on. You know, the bottom line is, as long as you have a president willing to keep to his guns and get us out and not do whatever this thing requires, then we're going to be okay. The problem you run into is if in 2020 a new president comes in with a new agenda, and then we're right back to where we started from. So, you know, I think it's important that we go through the entire formal process and get out by whatever means it is. You know, clearly we can, you know, not do what we have to. But at some point, this thing is like a zombie waiting to be, woken up with another president.
And just to be clear, what the issues are here, as you're pointing out before we went to break, the fact that China had been picked by the globalists as the new industrial base. So they were given an exemption in this, even though they're supposedly addressing a global climate issue. Even according to those who have the climate models, the climate science that we disagree with, it would have a minimal effect even if they went through and implemented this. So it is a scam that even those who disagree with us on the climate science can see the scam here, because it's really about political and economic power. It's about crony capitalism with carbon credits, but it's also about carbon taxes that are going to fund a world government. It's basically going to leave us powerless politically, as well as literally powerless without any electricity. But talk to us, Craig, about the endangerment clause, because that still remains. I know there were people who were pushing within the Trump administration, many of whom have now been moved out, who were saying we've got to get out of the endangerment clause because that's also going to be used by the courts, just like this phony treaty that we never ratified is going to be used to push their climate agenda on us.
Yeah, in order to regulate CO2, the EPA needed a just cause in their mind. Well, it's statutorily, and there had to be something that was going to endanger the public. Therefore, they, as a regulatory body of clean air, had to step in, and they got that in the court case with Massachusetts, and showing that climate change or global warming was real and that it was going to have a real endangerment. And the primary issue in there was PM 2.5, which is a particulate matter that they said, well, our models are showing that this is going to be increasing, and not only that, it's a carcinogen and it can kill you. So
yeah, I remember all of that.
I
remember them doing that in North Carolina. They were hooking, the EPA was hooking people. They'd search for people who had respiratory and heart issues. Then they literally hooked them up to diesel exhaust, trying to create an event. And you had Lisa Jackson telling the Congress that more people were dying of fine particulate matter than were dying of cancer. The EPA had a picture of the Smoky Mountains and said, This is Exhibit A of fine particulate matter. I mean, it was called the Smoky Mountains before there were even any white people here, let alone any industry. So, I mean, the thing was a total fraud.
Yeah, exactly. And then, that they say they're going to kill you on one hand, and on the other hand, like you say, they're putting people's mouths to diesel trucks. So the issue with the court case was they were relying on modeling, again, the Al Gore movie type modeling coming out in the 90s, none of which was anywhere near true, anywhere near as dangerous, or the temperatures went and nowhere near what they said. CO2, I certainly don't think it's a pollutant in the first place, but the legal issue was that they, in order to push forward on the Clean Power Plan and these draconian regulations, they relied on something called the endangerment finding that came out of the court cases. So unless you tackle the actual finding from that court case and say, no, that science that you rested that decision on is in fact incorrect, and let's do that by updating it with real science, not models from the 90s, but look at 20-year historical data, and let's come up and decide again whether or not this is an endangerment or not. And that's really the crown jewel in all this, because if that thing stays in, just like the Clean Power Plan, like I said, that thing's a vampire waiting to wake up in terms of the
So what has to happen with the endangerment clause? Is that something that the Department of Justice needs to do since this is a court case, or is that something that can be done by the EPA, or where would that be tackled?
You need to petition the EPA, and then the EPA need to respond to it, and then it would get it back into the courts. And we actually thought in the last administration of trying to do that, but ideally it could be a congressional action too. You'd like to get them involved too. You'd like to get them involved in anything, but it doesn't seem like they're doing much these days in general. But
yeah.
I mean, it needs to be sort of all the above, but you really need to have the administration. I mean, the administration could drive the train on anything it really wants to. We have had discussions on that. There are, we're all for it. Certainly, there's even some within the coalition that think, well, that's too hard to lift. And I'm thinking, well, now's the time to do it. If you don't do it now, then forever hold your peace.
That's right. Absolutely important. And this is a vital issue, and it is vital for people, I think, to understand that they need to support President Trump on these issues that he campaigned on the Trump agenda, because for whatever reason, he's got a lot of people in his administration that are pushing back against this very agenda. So nothing can be taken for granted. Supporting Trump means supporting his agenda, and these are two vital issues. Absolutely. And you guys are right on top of it. Thank you so much. Craig Richardson, E&E Legal, Environment and Energy Legal, and you can find them at eelegal.org. That's it for today's broadcast. I'm David Knight with Real News, and